I got my first car when I was 18 years old. I'd been 18 years old for about 6 months-ish. I got my license and took my test in my car. And I remember the examiner getting next to me and he said, "What the hell is this?" My name is Andrew St Pierre White. Join me as I build four-wheel trucks and travel to the remotest parts of the world. I'm a prisoner of this hill. It was a Ford Escort RS 1600. It had a 1600 engine, but the engine was a BDA. That's a belt-driven Type A, double overhead cam, 4 valve per cylinder. Now you must understand that in 1972, when the car was made, 4 valve per cylinder was cutting edge racing technology. The trouble is with it that when you idled it, the gear stick did this and the whole car shook because it was incredibly inefficient at low RPM. And when you put your foot down, nothing would happen until 2,999 RPM. And at 3,000 RPM, everything would happen all at once. Driven to the back wheels with a solid axle, open differential, you must remember traction control and anti-skid control was still 2 decades away from being commonplace. So I crashed it. Well, the first day I got my license and freedom, young man, freedom, like this. And I went around a corner and I turned the steering wheel and I had only just learned how to drive. I didn't know how to drive. This thing was completely, it was like getting into a fighter jet when you've just learned how to fly. You're not going to be able to control it. Well, I spun it, because it went 2,900 and 3,000 RPM and then the vehicle just like this. And I didn't hit anybody. So it wasn't officially an accident. About 20 minutes later, I did it again. Spun it, hit another car. Very slight damage to the other car, I just nicked it. I remember. And I was then just driving this thing. It was like a ferocious beast and I had to be so careful of it. I remember taking it to a mate's house and I said, "Oh, I got myself a car, cool." You know, we were both 18. "Oh, you got yourself a car, cool. Oh, this looks nice. It's nice and yellow and sporty and everything." Sat next to me. And again, he said, "What the hell is this?" And it got gear sticks doing this, doing that. So I said, I'll show you, straight road. I'll show you. And I wound it. It would rev to 6,500 RPM. So at that time also, 6,500 RPM for any engine, even a petrol engine, was pretty high, higher than normal. And I would rev it easily to 6,500 RPM, and this thing went like the bats. It would wheel spin very easily. And if the road was even slightly slippery, it would just wheel spin. If it was a hot tar and dry, then it wouldn't. It would just take off like a scalded rabbit. Into second, into third, and the actual time was 0 to 60 in 6.3 seconds was the actual measured advertised time. And we were getting fairly close to that. And so I could beat anything. I could beat any Alfa Romeo put against me. I could knock them out of the park. And there was, of course, a huge rivalry between Ford and Alfa Romeo. And this thing would go, I would go and look for, like an idiot, an 18-year-old idiot, go and look for dices. We used to call them, it was called dicing. It was a South African colloquialism, dicing. And we used to go and look for them and drill them, just wipe them. And it was so, because it was a Ford Escort. And it wasn't something clever and fancy and sparkly. It was just a Ford Escort. And he used to go like the clappers. I used to make the greatest sound. Now the trouble is with video, well, with film, this is all filmed with Super 8 film. And Super 8 film didn't record sound until much later. And what I would do is I would film and then I would add the sound later. Anyway, it was difficult making a film and the sound of this double twin stroke carburetor. This Escort, the RS Escorts, were actually built at a place called Dagenham in the UK, and a special vehicle operations unit where they used to assemble the Escort Mexicos, and all the Ford sporty cars were assembled in a different plant, and they were strengthened. It actually had strengthening inside on the chassis, on the bodywork, on the monocoque bodywork, and it was designed for rallying and racing. These were designed to be modified for racing. That was their primary purpose. And I got one of the very few imported into South Africa that was actually not modified for racing. It just came in its standard form. And then I started getting better at driving it. Low down where you feeling, sexy things to do. Baby, 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 let me talk to you. But it was unreliable. I had a lot of trouble with it, and eventually the motor actually needed rebuilding. And I had a guy rebuild it for me, and his name was Giovanni Puazzo Musso. His name, amazing that I can remember that name right now. He used to do a lot of racing and rally car development, and he was the only one I could trust with this very unusual engine. And he rebuilt the engine for me. It cost me a great deal of money, and 2 days after, or 3 days, I can't remember, after I took delivery of it with this new motor, which had even more power, a small piece of metal came through the airbox, went into the cylinder and got jammed into the piston, and the motor was wrecked again. I then took it back to him and said, and he rebuilt it again, and I then sold it because it was just too troublesome. And I bought a car called the 1600 Sport, also a Ford Escort, 1600. This was the Escort Mark II, and that got my first taste of off-roading. Yeah, in a Ford Escort, and it didn't do very well. But it was an absolutely reliable car. I had a steady job, steady income, and I bought a brand new one, and it cost me 4,740 rands. But I kept that Ford Escort for only 2 years. It was then that I bought my Range Rover. But even buying my Range Rover didn't spell the end for my love of Ford Escorts. This time an RS 2000. I needed something just to run around town with so I wouldn't clock up such high mileage on my Range Rover. But I was still a bit of a hooligan at heart, and this didn't end well. The accident found me in hospital, the other driver in hospital. It was my fault. I was a hooligan. I used to take this one particular thing. I mean, I know exactly where it is. I know exactly where the accident happened. And it was a slip road to the right. And I would come belting down it, and I would flick the steering wheel. And the back would come out, and I would correct slightly, and just at the right moment, hit the accelerator as hard as I could and straighten out and shoot through this little gap, except one day I didn't see the Audi 500. This was an effective cure for my hooliganism. See you tomorrow as I go through my truck and find all the little bits and pieces that would make really nice Christmas gifts. In case you've left it so late that you still haven't got your four-wheel drive enthusiast a gift to comfort around the camp. So there you go. I use that, and I must say, I love it.